So we're going to do some warm up here, and so I'll read this at 200, and then I'll like repeat at least some of it faster, if indeed I can read it faster. But I'm sorry. Hold on a moment. For the record, as you know, I represent the Reverend John White, his daughter Sandra Thompson, and his son David White. This case is about the death of Lucille White, wife of Reverend White, for almost 55 years. This case is also about the life of Lucille White, because you're going to hear evidence about Lucille White and the kind of woman that she was, and about the kind of loss that the family sustained when she died. In this case, the evidence is going to show that Lucille White's colon was punctured by defendant Calvin Olson during a procedure called a sigmoidoscopy. That's a diagnostic examination. It's an intrusive examination in that an instrument is put into the rectum of the patient, and the instrument, the sigmoidoscope, has a light on the end and a lens on the end. Air is pumped into the colon, and so that it's inflated enough so that you can see in there, and then the doctor examines the colon. What he's looking for, the evidence will show you, is lesions, cancer, other abnormalities that might be in the colon. These abnormalities are generally very small. They can be very small in the millimeters in size. What happened in this case was unusual. What happened was that Dr. Olson, in doing the procedure, caused a 2.5 centimeter laceration in Lucille White's colon. 2.5 centimeters is about an inch. That doesn't sound big, but you will hear that the 2.5 centimeters in the colon is a large laceration. Dr. Kogan is another doctor who's going to be one of our experts in this case. He is going to testify that that's actually a huge laceration. Lucille White had this laceration by Dr. Olson, and then Dr. Olson afterwards didn't detect it. So he's looking for abnormalities in the colon that are actually very small, but he didn't see a 2.5 centimeter long laceration that he caused. After the sigmoidoscopy, Lucille White became very ill, and she, as you'll hear, she ultimately died. At the end of this case, I'm going to ask you to award damages to the family of Lucille White for their loss that was caused by the negligence of Dr. Olson, and also Dr. I don't know. Sorry, what can we call him? Frederick, Dr. Frederick. I want to tell you in a little more detail about the evidence that's going to come in this case. Prior to her sigmoidoscopy, Lucille White was a healthy 72-year-old woman. She had been married to Reverend John White for about 55 years, as I said. She was active in his church and her church. She assisted him in the church. She worked off and on all year long at the Sierra Pines Youth Camp, a Christian youth camp. She, over the years, had hundreds of foster children going through her home. John White, her husband, was ordained in 1960 as a Baptist minister, and again, they were married for about 55 years. On November 20th, 1999, Lucille White went for a routine physical examination with defendant Dr. Frederick. At that examination, nothing was found unusual or wrong. She was found to be a healthy 72-year-old woman. However, Dr. Frederick referred her for a sigmoidoscopy, which is also a fairly routine examination with Dr. Olson. There was nothing in her history, in Lucille White's history, her family history, that would indicate that she had a danger of colon cancer or anything that would require this procedure. But again, Dr. Frederick felt it was a routine procedure and referred her out for it. While Lucille White was in his office November 20th, an appointment was made with Dr. Olson, who's also worked for Sutter Gould, as does Dr. Frederick. And that appointment was made some months down the road for March 22nd, 1999. I don't know if I may have said November 20th, 1998, so that was a mistake. It was November 20th, 1998, that the physical examination occurred. And then on March 22nd, 1999, Lucille White reported for the sigmoidoscope or sigmoidoscopy at Dr. Olson's office. Now, he did the sigmoidoscopy and he didn't find anything unusual. There didn't seem to be anything wrong with Lucille White, but unbeknownst to him, he caused this 2.5 centimeter laceration in her colon. Now, the evidence in this case is going to be, and this is an issue in this case, that Lucille White had not been adequately advised of the dangers of perforation and even death due to this procedure. Admittedly, that kind of result is rare, but the testimony of our expert witnesses in this case will tell you that a patient should be told of the initial dangers before they submit to this kind of procedure. They should be told that there could be a colon perforation, that they could die from it, so that they can make an informed decision about the procedure. After the procedure, the evidence will show you that Lucille White was not given specific instructions as to what to do if symptoms developed. So if she began to feel sick and had abdominal cramping or pain or any other symptoms, what should she do and what symptoms should she look out for? She wasn't told about that. Specifically, she wasn't told who to call if that happened, that she should call Dr. Olson. After the sigmoidoscopy with Dr. Olson, Mrs. White returned home and she didn't feel well, but she had actually been told by Dr. Olson that she might not feel well for a day or two, so she wasn't concerned. She was told she might feel cramping for a day or two, so she wasn't worried. She came home and the next day she felt even worse. She was bedridden. Now her family was more concerned about her than her. She was under the impression that it was nothing to worry about, that she might feel this kind of pain. Her family, though, was a bit worried about her, and her foster daughter, Danette Johnson, who was with her both the day of the sigmoidoscopy, and was particularly worried. You'll hear evidence that Danette Johnson was Lucille White's foster daughter. She was with her and she took her to the appointment with Dr. Olson. She stayed at the house. She was there with her the whole next day. She was very close to Lucille White and in fact called Lucille mom, and Lucille treated her like a daughter. In the morning, Danette spoke to Lucille and Lucille confided in her that she was feeling very badly, that she had abdominal crampings, that she was nauseous, and Danette urged her to call the doctor. Lucille said, "It's not important. Dr. Olson said I might feel bad the next day." Nevertheless, Danette called the doctor and she called Dr. Frederick, who was Lucille's primary care physician. Now, one of the issues in this case is going to be how many phone calls were made to Dr. Frederick, what was said in those phone calls, and what was the gist of those phone calls. Dr. Frederick is going to tell you he doesn't even remember the phone calls, but he has a note in Lucille's records that to his mind indicates there was just one phone call, and that at that time he prescribed 2 different medications, one for abdominal cramping and one for nausea. But the evidence that we will be presenting to you is that Danette Johnson called at about 9 in the morning to Dr. Frederick. She spoke to a receptionist. She was told there would be a call back. There was no call back. She called back at about 10 in the morning. At that time, she insisted on speaking directly to Dr. Frederick. She told Dr. Frederick that her mom was having these symptoms, that she had had a sigmoidoscopy the day before. Okay, well, that was difficult material.
Seemed like it was difficult to read.
Here we'll try and go up to 210. Different material for the record. Shasta County Sheriff Sergeant Brad McDonald testified in connection with the Section 1118.1 motion for a directed verdict on this special circumstance allegation that a probable cause declaration is normally filled out and placed in the arrestee's permanent jacket for inclusion in the sheriff's records, and that Deputy Perrigo followed that procedure in defendant's case. Additionally, the Bernie substation maintains an official daily log recording the activities of all of its officers, which is kept by the records supervisor and is an official record of the Shasta County Sheriff's Department. The daily log for the date and time of the defendant's arrest recorded all pertinent information surrounding his arrest. We therefore find that the probable cause declaration and the daily log memorializing the details of defendant's arrest constituted recordation of his arrest in official police records within the meaning of the definition of booked found in Section 7, Subdivision 21. Additionally, Sergeant McDonald testified that the reason defendant was not fingerprinted or photographed upon being brought into the substation on the morning of October 21 was that his fingerprints and photograph were already on file with the department as a result of his earlier arrest in July of that same year by the same agency in connection with the prowling/public intoxication incident. In such instances, all that was required to complete the official booking process at the Bernie substation and to authorize transport of defendant to the main jail in Reading was the completion of the probable cause declaration. Sergeant McDonald testified further that public intoxication is not a retainable offense requiring fingerprinting in the first instance. We conclude the record establishes that following defendant's valid arrest for a violation of Section 647F and his transport to the Bernie substation, defendant was booked on the charge with the statutory definition of that term, and hence the evidence is sufficient to support all the requisite elements of the murder to perfect escape from lawful custody, special circumstance finding. Okay. I think we'll just stop there.